Hello and welcome to part 2 of our short course. Here we'll be covering a bit about the methodology to calculate your carbon footprint and explain scopes 1, 2 and 3 emissions. Now that we know what net zero is and the benefits, it's time to start thinking about taking action. The first step in acting on net zero is understanding and identifying where your emissions lie as a business. The best way to do this is via the GHG Protocol. The GHG Protocol is a globally recognised accounting and reporting framework for calculating company emissions. They're a global standard and they're the world's most widely used greenhouse gas accounting framework, and 92% of FTSE 500 companies who are reporting their emissions use the GHG Protocol. You may or may not have heard of scopes 1, 2 and 3. The GHG Protocol are the ones who introduced them, and they're pretty much just a way of categorising the different kind of carbon emissions that a company creates. So we've got scope 1 here, this is direct emissions, and these are emissions that come directly from the operations that are owned or controlled by the company. So for example, having gas boilers or vehicles. Scope 2 is indirect emissions that come from the generation of purchased or acquired electricity, steam, heating or cooling. So rather than producing energy on site with a gas boiler, it might be just buying energy from an energy provider. Then scope 3 is basically just everything else, so it's all other indirect emissions that occur in the value chain of the company. Now, if you don't own or rent your own office, so let's say you work from home or you work in a co-working space, 100% of your emissions are going to be scope 3. Scope 3 is then broken down into upstream and downstream emissions, and I've just got a couple of definitions for you here. Upstream is emissions that are contributing towards the creation of your product or service, for example, compute emissions from developing an app. And then downstream is emissions that are released as a result of your product or service existing, for example, energy emissions from a user's app usage on their phone. Now I've just got a couple of diagrams to try and contextualise that a little bit more. At the top here we've got this nice little infographic just showing in scope 1 where we've got owned equipment, facilities and vehicles. Scope 2 we've got the kind of energy production, and then scope 3 is just everything else. So here we can see employee emissions from travel and commuting. We got leased assets here from kind of like the operations, and then all other supply chain emissions such as material extraction or production, material distribution and waste. This diagram has been pulled directly from the GHG Protocol and just shows the different subcategories within scopes 1, 2 and 3. Scope 1's pretty easy. We can just see company vehicles and facilities, and again in scope 2 it's just the purchased electricity. Scope 3 goes a bit more granular and we have multiple different subcategories for both upstream and downstream activities. So here we got purchased goods and services. This is, for example, accountancy and legal fees. We got capital goods, and this is things like office equipment like desks and laptops. Then we've got fuel and energy related activities. This is anything energy related which isn't covered in scope 1 or 2, for example energy providers who generate electricity to sell to customers. Transportation and distribution, this could be delivery of capital goods. Then we've got waste generated in operations, business travel and commuting. Business travel is just any travel that's not done by the commute, getting to and from work. And then leased assets here, this is your co-working space like WeWork or warehouse and storage facilities. Then on the downstream activities, we've got, again, transportation and distribution. This could be shipping your product to customers. Then we've got processing of sold products, and this could be emissions from processing things called intermediate products. And these are basically products that are then used to make other products, like salt, rice, rubber or cotton. So it's more kind of materials or ingredients focused. Then we've got use of sold products. This is like the example I gave before, energy usage from using an app. End of life treatment, so if a product's recycled or has gone to landfill. Leased assets, so this time it's if a company is leasing a building to you. So for example, WeWork leasing the co-working space to you. Then we've got franchises, so this is, for example, like McDonald's or Subway, just operations emissions that don't quite fit into scope 1 and 2. And then lastly, we've got investments, for example, pension emissions. So there's lots of examples here, but don't worry, it will all be summarised in your info pack, which I'll share with you after the workshop. And it's important to remember that the GHG Protocol is a global, one-size-fits-all, industry-agnostic framework. So for many companies, particularly the small businesses that we work with, a lot of these categories won't be relevant, and we actually take care of categorising the data for you if you choose to calculate your emissions with us. All you need to remember is that the GHG Protocol is a framework for categorising company emissions. Now I'd like to invite you again to take a look at and think about these questions and just have a moment of reflection on what we've just learned. Do you understand the difference between scopes 1, 2 and 3 emissions? Do you know your scopes 1, 2 and 3 emissions, and would you like to know more? Do you have plans to calculate and reduce your emissions, and do you need help? So now it's time to take a look at section 2 of our Net Zero Canvas, where you can just put your answers in the top right section, and I'll see you in part 3.